fall of the Berlin Wall just over 30 years ago came amidst sweeping changes that would end the Cold War and see the downfall of corrupt authoritarian regimes across Eastern Europe. But 3 decades on, the pro-democracy optimism of those days has turned sour. Xenophobia and nationalism are on the rise. Political corruption has not gone away. In the second of 2 special reports, we've been to Bulgaria, Romania and Poland to ask why the lessons of history haven't been learned.
Eastern Europe, 30 years after the end of the Cold War, beset with rising ultranationalism and struggling to find answers to hatred and corruption. The euphoria that swept the continent 30 years ago in the wake of the fall of the Berlin Wall seems like a distant dream. Within 2 months, communist dictatorships from the Baltic to the Black Sea were ousted. The Iron Curtain was gone. Europe appeared to be on the brink of a brighter future. But these hopes were dashed, perhaps nowhere more so than Bulgaria, a country which, despite the propaganda, endured one of the most repressive communist dictatorships. When the Red Army marched into Bulgaria in the dying throes of World War II, it began a reign of terror that lasted 46 years.
Само убитите за първите няколко месеца без съд и присъда и безследно изчезнали са между 18 и 30 хиляди.
Everyone was targeted: intellectuals, peasants, and aristocrats. One of the first victims of communism was King SIMEON II, who ascended the throne aged 6 after the mysterious death of his father, Tsar Boris III, who was reportedly poisoned on Hitler's orders for refusing to send Bulgarian Jews to Nazi death camps.
The thing that struck me was that all of a sudden my father's ADC addressed me as Your Majesty, which of course he only used for my father, and that's where I suddenly realized that my father was no more. But that's a tiny detail. But of course afterwards I was supposed to be the king and act like a grown-up in spite of my age.
The Red Army killed SIMEON's uncle, the regent, and exiled the boy king and his mother. It would be half a century before he could return.
It wasn't the moment I set foot physically on. It was when the plane touched down on the runway where I had a tremendous sort of emotion, and my wife realized it because it was actually 50 years later that suddenly I was landing in Bulgaria.
It was a land unrecognizable to the king, who later served briefly as prime minister. A command economy had transformed the country. Almost everything of value had been taken from the people and put in the hands of the state. And only now the full horrors of the regime were coming to light. This is Belene, a concentration camp that operated well into the 1980s. Built on an island in the middle of the Danube, there was no chance of escape for the thousands of political prisoners who were sent there.
Единственото нещо, по което нацистските концентрационни лагери се отличават, българските се отличават от нацистските, това е, че няма крематориум.
One man who survived this ordeal is PANKOWSKI, now in his 80s.
По-възрастните повечето загинаха. Един остров е определен за гробовете с карати. Обаче не ги само набързо закопават и те ги оглозваха. Затворник каза, като се замелее тук от костите им, ме карат да ги хвърлям в Дунава.
Belene is part of this dirty and bloody network of 86 concentration camps in Bulgaria. 30,000 people passed through Belene, and most of them found their dead there.
По време на социализма хората бяха бедни, но държавата беше много богата.
Vladimir Zarev is Bulgaria's leading novelist. He has charted Bulgaria's transition from communism to democracy, a period of lost opportunities. In 1990, there was no meaningful change of government, he says. The Communist Party simply changed its name to the Socialist Party.
Говореше се, например, че тогавашният министър-председател Андрей Луканов е събрал хора и им е казал: другари, от днес ви назначавам за милионери.
Not surprisingly, the economy collapsed, and almost 1 in 3 Bulgarians left the country.
Жалост, най-младите, най-интелигентните, най-подготвените, тези, които могат, тези, които духовно извисени хора с професии, хора с възможности, точно те напуснаха, голяма част от тях напуснаха България.
The population hemorrhaged, leaving the elderly behind. Today, there are 1,500 deserted villages throughout Bulgaria. In Belamoche, we met Stefan, the last inhabitant who can no longer afford electricity. He took us to one of the many deserted houses. Stefan believes the situation is so bad, things were actually better under the communists.
Като падна Берлинската стена, действително селото опустя. Демокрацията в момента, това е пълно разорение на цялата държава.
Many of Bulgaria's rural villages have become ghost communities.
We've got a major problem, which is, shall we say, endemic, and that's that for the past 20 or so years, we are decreasing. There's a lot of villages which are empty. This is a sad phenomenon.
Buzlitsa, built by the country's last dictator, Todorchikov, is emblematic of the problem. The space-age structure was once a showpiece headquarters for the Politburo. It's now derelict. The authorities cannot afford either to maintain or to demolish it. Buzlitsa remains frozen in time, a surreal reminder of a communist legacy that still dogs Bulgaria. Over the border in Romania, an equally dark story is still emerging. A nondescript complex on the outskirts of the capital, Bucharest, houses the archive of the SECURITATE, Romania's feared secret police during communism. GEMINA NAGAT has been sifting through the files since they were opened to the public in 2005, a condition for Romania's entry into the EU.
This place, to put it metaphorically, is a belly of a monster. The most sinister library you can imagine. It's an evil library, actually. You know what is this? It's a documentary file with letters written from the prison on bed sheets. One of the letters is addressed to the United Nations. We ask the United Nations organization to defend the human rights. Fear and terror are the real masters of the Romanian nation. Any thought which is not according to the line of the party means imprisonment, isolation and terror.
One of communism's most infamous dictators, Nicolae Ceausescu, turned Romania into Europe's closest equivalent to North Korea. Coming to power in 1965, Ceausescu developed his own personality cult. The cheering crowds masked a regime characterized by arbitrary detention, execution without trial, and malnutrition, while the dictator and his wife lived the high life. Ceausescu's prisons like this one at Jalava now lie empty, but estimates of the number of people jailed for political reasons run into the millions.
Let me show you some other things. This time it's from the end of 80s. These are all recruitment papers for pupils. They recruited youngsters to become informants in schools. This is corrupting the young generation of a country and destroying its inner self, its inner, bone structure.
The end, when it came, was swift and brutal for the Ceausescus. An uprising in Timișoara, 500 kilometers to the east, was spreading towards the capital. And when the dictator addressed the people in Revolution Square, the writing was already on the wall. Ceausescu and his wife can be heard off camera ordering the people to be quiet. With the crowd out of control, the Ceausescus fled, only to be captured and taken to a military barracks in Trigăvista, an hour from the capital, where a young army captain found himself face to face with the former tyrant.
Aveam în față nu numai un șef de stat, că nu era un șef de stat obișnuit. Era un dictator care pur și simplu a condus țara prin instaurarea fricii. Și în tot cursul procesului, care a durat aproximativ o oră, el nu a recunoscut tribunalul militar.
The trial was broadcast to the nation. The Ceausescus were taken to this spot and summarily executed. The pictures were broadcast immediately. You can still see the bullet holes. Ion Iliescu, a former communist minister who had been groomed to succeed the dictator, seized power, claiming to be a Democrat. He alleged that terrorists were threatening the country and unleashed the full force of the army. In the resulting chaos, over 800 people lost their lives.
He presented himself as the honest one and the one that did not enrich himself, but underneath him, how about the rest of his cronies? Were they also poor? Don't think so.
Iliescu would serve 3 terms as president of Romania, during which time none of his former communist colleagues were brought to justice. His party, the Social Democrats, has enjoyed a near monopoly on power.
Romania was a country that decided to hide dirt under the carpet and hope that if we don't discuss the inconvenient truth, those realities are going to go away.
With the former communists in power, the wealth of the country was plundered. The economy collapsed and widespread poverty pushed millions to the breadline. It wasn't until Romania joined the EU that things began to change. Under pressure from Brussels, the National Anti-Corruption Directorate was founded. Chief Prosecutor Laura Kövesi began to indict high-ranking politicians. Controversially, she relied heavily on wiretapping and covert filming.
Atât persoanele care oferă mită, cât și persoanele care iau mită, întotdeauna doresc ca acest lucru se întâmple într-un loc ascuns.
This was Romania's former Minister of Agriculture, filmed taking a bribe. Almost 1,400 individuals were convicted, including 5 ministers, 18 judges, 11 state prosecutors, and 24 mayors.
Before 2012, we never had a minister in this country convicted for corruption. Try to imagine the shock of the political class.
Liviu Dragnea, until recently the leader of the Social Democrats, who was banned from becoming Prime Minister because of a previous conviction, tried to portray Kövesi's war on corruption as an attack on human rights and drafted new legislation which would effectively nullify all court cases against him and his fellow politicians.
Acest conflict se duce între noi, care vrem să modificăm niște legi, care uzurpă drepturi și libertăți fundamentale, și cei care vor să continue aceste abuzuri.
For Dragnea, it was a question of survival. The appeal court were about to hear a number of cases against him. Should the crimes no longer be illegal, he was off the hook. When last year he finally succeeded in firing Kövesi, it looked like he had won, but Kövesi remained defiant.
Corupția poate fi înfrântă. Nu, episodul de astăzi nu este o înfrângere.
Dragnea's apparent victory was too much for the people. Almost 30 years on from the toppling of Ceausescu, Revolution Square was once again occupied by 100,000 protesters.
All the demonstrations the last years in Romania was for the rule of law and for justice.
The riot police were instructed to break up the peaceful protests.
They start to fire with grenades, smoke grenades, fire grenades, but they did not shoot them in the air. They start to fire through us. A grenade took a part of my leg.
DORU nearly died from his injury. Hundreds were hospitalized. The future of Romania hung in the balance.
Indeed, it was a cliffhanger, because if you modify the criminal legislation, then everything is gone. And this is what they try to do.
But under pressure from the people, the lawmakers failed to push through the legislation, and Dragnea is behind bars serving a 3-year prison term. Even Iliescu, once seen as the hero of the revolution, is facing charges of crimes against humanity for staging a coup in order to seize power. He denies any wrongdoing.
We didn't have a revolution here in '89, it was just a coup d'etat. We thought that it was a revolution, but behind people's back, somewhere, the ex-former generals of the Romanian secret police, they just try to get rid of Ceausescu and they take power. They transform from communists to social democrats, and they said, now everything is okay, we have democracy. But in fact, it was just, it was a fake democracy.
But while anger at state corruption brings thousands of young protesters onto the streets of Bucharest, it's a completely different story in Poland's capital, Warsaw. This is Independence Day.
It started as a small event with just a few hundred people, but over the years it grew, and in the last years it had about 200,000 people, which makes it the biggest far-right gathering anywhere. And I think the growth of this one event illustrates the social acceptance of radical nationalist ideology, especially among the younger people.
Poland is governed in all but name by Jarosław Kaczynski, leader of the Law and Justice Party, which won power in 2015. Others took the office of Prime Minister and President, but no one is in much doubt about who is in charge. Kaczynski swiftly cemented his government's authority by purging national TV of independent journalists and pushing for state control of the judiciary.
Wygraliśmy wybory, ale nie mamy prawa tworzyć prawa. Nie mamy prawa przebudowywać Polski. A Polskę przebudować trzeba. I to musi być wielka przebudowa, na miarę naszej historii.
Nationalist governments are a sure recipe for disaster. Germany never had a more nationalist government than the National Socialists, right? And forget what it did to the rest of the world. It produced the greatest disaster in German history ever.
The Holocaust Museum in Warsaw bears testimony to horrors committed during the Second World War, when 6 million Polish citizens perished, many at death camps like Auschwitz. But in recent years, views once thought consigned to history have returned. An effigy of a Hasidic Jew was burned while a mob cheered in the city of Wrocław shortly after the Law and Justice Party came to power 4 years ago. It's not an isolated case. The most recent incident was in April 2019 in the town of Pruchnik.
This is the kind of expression of anti-Jewish sentiment that we didn't see in this country for many, many years.
However, the rising tide of anti-Semitism was drawing international condemnation. Other targets of populist rhetoric were found. In the run-up to the general election in October 2019, Kaczynski turned his fire on the LGBT community.
Jedna kobieta, jeden mężczyzna w stałym związku i dzieci.
One newspaper began offering LGBT-free zone stickers. Swidnik was one of several towns that claimed to be LGBT-free ahead of the election.
If you declare LGBT-free zone, it's the people that it targets. You get stones are being thrown onto people and someone decides to go on a people hunt.
Of course, many ordinary Poles are horrified at the rise in hate speech. But in October 2019, things reached a new low at a pride march in the city of Lublin.
The police caught a couple who brought a bomb to the march, and they were ready to detonate that. And the police experts said if it happened, it might have killed people.
Lech Wałęsa, former shipyard worker and Poland's elder statesman, awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for steering his country to democracy, is outraged.
Otóż już jestem starszym człowiekiem, jak pan wie, 76 lat. Myślałem sobie wypoczywać i chodzić na grzybki, na rybki, no ale to, co widzę, to mi się nie podoba i znów zacząłem walczyć.
In the 1980s, Poland was the epicenter of the Cold War. The Solidarity movement, headed by Lech Wałęsa, organized strikes in the Gdansk shipyards, which quickly spread across the country, prompting the communist authorities to declare martial law. Solidarity held its nerve, and before the decade was out, Poland had democracy. But earlier this year, another event rocked Gdansk to its foundations. Paweł Adamowicz, the city's mayor for 20 years, was stabbed by a man who burst onto an open-air stage at a national charity event. The killer condemned the Civic Platform Party, which opposes the current government, as he murdered Adamowicz. Adamowicz spoke up for minorities and condemned homophobia. Like his close friend Lech Wałęsa, he was routinely attacked by the state-controlled media.
Just over the 12 months that preceded his death, he appeared on news and public TV more than 100 times, all of them in a negative context.
With widespread vilification, Adamowicz feared for his life.
In one extreme case, the far-right nationalist group, the All Polish Youth, produced a symbolic death certificate, which they plastered in the city. But the police dropped the investigation just 1 or 2 weeks before he was killed.
The assassination, coming 30 years after the first free elections in Poland, casts a shadow over Gdansk, where the struggle for freedom against communist rule had its first victory not only in Poland, but arguably in the whole of Eastern Europe.
Zwróćcie uwagę na Polskę. Tutaj zlekceważono demokrację. Oddano władzę przez lekceważenie populistom i demagogom. I mamy kłopoty.
The re-election of Jarosław Kaczynski's Law and Justice Party, just 2 weeks before the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, sent a chill wind across the continent of Europe. In several countries, where once communism held sway, now populist nationalism dominates. Some of the rhetoric has changed, but the authoritarianism that many once dreamed of escaping keeps rearing its ugly head.